before I get started on this theory, I want to preface that this is entirely Watsonian and nothing is Doylist. Because, frankly, the Doylist reason for why any of the points that I'm about to bring up are even points to bring up at all is because of fumbling on the part of the people that make the show. Whether that be an animation issue or the fact that Ben 10's quality and competence of writing is constantly in a state of fluctuation instead of just being really, really competent and really, really quality with only a few fumbles here and there. And unfortunately, it's not that, so now I had to explain this theory that I came up with to try to make sense of Albedo not making sense in Omniverse. So, baseline of the theory, as you can tell by the title and the thumbnail, is that my thinking is that there are 3 different Albedos in the show. Now, I know Ruby fans are probably going to be like, oh, is this like the 2 Atoms theory? And no, the 2 Atoms theory is just inherently stupid and made by people who misunderstood 2 seconds worth of Atoms content and had an expectation that the show didn't fulfill, which is not what this is. This is where the latter part of what they did with Albedo does not make sense in comparison to the majority of what they've done with Albedo. And I'm not just talking about nonsensically changing the pronunciation from Albedo to Albedo for literally no reason whatsoever. So the theory is that from good copy, bad copy, to for a few brains more, is the original Albedo. This is the original Albedo who helped Azimuth with creation of the Omnitrix, as well as a few other things, both before Azimuth left for Xenon and after Azimuth came back from Xenon, as seen in the Omniverse flashbacks. The same one that built a knockoff Omnitrix and accidentally got himself stuck as a genetic copy of Ben, which then turned into a photo-negative copy of Ben. Oh, all of that works. I do think that him still looking for revenge after being able to turn into his Galvan form doesn't really line up that well, but at least for the little story arc he had in Season 4 of Omniverse, I'm willing to let it slide. Because he is kind of petty. I do think that we need to acknowledge that he is petty. So, he might still want revenge, so it's not out of the question that that's something he would do. However, his next appearance does not make sense, which is in the 200th episode special 2-parter, and then there were none, and then there was Ben. It doesn't make sense for Albedo to reunite with Vilgax. Vilgax is kind of the crux of this theory, is that in the Alien Force finale, Albedo already teamed up with Vilgax, who betrayed him. Now, I know that not all Galvan are smart. Blukich and Driba aren't that smart. They can do some technical stuff, but by Galvan standards, they're pretty unintelligent. But Albedo is literally the assistant to Azimuth. So I do think that we need to talk about, like, Albedo's flaws as a character. Like I said, he's petty, he's very arrogant, and those things are his downfall ultimately. But I don't think that he's stupid. And I also, as much as I rag on Ben's intelligence, because yes, Ben is a moron, I don't think that this is something that we can, like, even attribute to him being affected by Ben. Because in his human form, Albedo is subject to Ben's tendencies. Mainly in way of, a love for chili fries. But even Ben is insanely distrustworthy of Vilgax. Which, makes sense. To the point that he outright thought that Vilgax hired the incursions and what are the Sodoragians, that's what they're called, incursions and Sodoragians to pretend to assassinate him, to break him out of jail, in Vilgax must croak. So I can't chalk it up to Ben's intelligence, because that would not work, because even Ben is not going to trust Vilgax. And Albedo, who is smarter than Ben and has already been betrayed by Vilgax, it doesn't make sense for him to team up with Vilgax again. And then there are a couple of other points. Now, granted, 199200 is riddled with plot holes and issues with its story that don't make any sense. But if we just focus on the Albedo stuff, then surely if the Albedo in that episode was our Albedo, one, he wouldn't be teamed up with Vilgax. Vilgax and Eon teamed up to gather all these other evil Bens to fight the good Bens. Well, for one, Albedo is not a Ben. The only reason that Albedo is in that special is because it would feel weird to have an episode with all these other Omnitrix users and not include the first one who was the other person to use the Omnitrix. Kevin was the first one to use its power, but Albedo was the first one to have an additional Omnitrix to actually use. So it's not in the context of, oh, well, yeah, he's a Ben. He's not. He's not a Ben. He hates that he's got Ben's body. He even more so hates that he has Ben's young body. But then he outright calls himself a Ben later in the episode, where he's like, every Ben for himself. It's like, well, for one, you're not a Ben. For another, Gwen, who is attacking you in this very instance where you say this line of dialogue, is also not a Ben. And I feel like the line of dialogue that Vilgax says with like, oh yeah, I'm going to destroy every Ben Tennyson that doesn't have an Omnitrix, doesn't work because Gwen also gets destroyed. And I think it confuses people. It's not that he did that, it's that Vilgax destroyed every other timeline from that point up until their revitalization, which, if that's the case, then there's not really a reason to restore them in the past, because they weren't destroyed in the past. They were destroyed from then until they were revived. There's really no reason for Paradox and no Watchmen to go back. I told you it's riddled with plot holes. But then there's the problem of Albedo gets erased by the time bomb, and for some reason, Ben Prime does not. So, surely if that's the same Albedo, as soon as he is wiped, Ben is wiped. Now granted, another plot hole is that the Omnitrix slides off of Ben Prime and onto No Watch Ben. I don't think that's going to stop it from having its timeline erased, because going on to No Watch Ben does not all of a sudden make it part of No Watch's timeline. It still came from Ben Prime's timeline. Therefore, it should be destroyed when Ben is destroyed. And Ben should be destroyed when Albedo is destroyed, if that is in fact our Albedo, which I don't think that it is. I think that because this Albedo very clearly defines himself as Ben, is a Ben Tennyson that looks like Albedo. I'm sorry, but somehow the writing made it to where it is far more likely that a Ben that just so happens to look like an Albedo version of young Ben and have access to ultimate forms is more likely than it just being the main Albedo, because they did not write it correctly. That's not a testament to what I was talking about with the inconsistent quality and competence of writing. I don't know what is. Then Malgax Attacks came along, and Malgax Attacks is very much not a good episode either. Somehow Vampire with feedback arms is able to defeat Vilgax wearing malware armor for some reason, but Atomics, who is supposed to be Ben's second most powerful alien, loses. He becomes exhausted when he doesn't even do anything other than punch, because for some reason Ben thinks that that's the coolest power ever, whenever it is substantially boring and lame. One of the other reasons that this episode is not good in terms of its writing is they expect us to believe that Albedo has twice before teamed up with Vilgax, and in both instances has been betrayed by Vilgax, and expects us to believe that he is going to do it for a third time. Which, no. No, absolutely not. I'm not buying that. I'm sorry, but, like, no. That doesn't make sense. Now, admittedly, beyond just that doesn't make sense, because it doesn't, there's not that much going for this episode being a different Albedo, aside from a visual error. For those of you that want to discredit this theory by saying, oh, well, it's just an animation error, you're right, it is just an animation error. That is the doylist reason, though. I refer you back to the beginning of the video where I said I am not counting the doylist reason, I am counting the Watsonian reason. As far as I am concerned, the Watsonian reason for this visual error, where Albedo's Galvan form looks like Azimuth colored red instead of looking like Albedo, as far as I'm concerned, that's because that's what Albedo looks like in that timeline. As far as I'm concerned, that entire episode is just a different timeline. It's not Vilgax somehow got his hands on another Albedo and then came back. Nah, it's just a different timeline that episode takes place in. But Malgax doesn't have as much going for it as 199 does, where, because of how poorly written it was, this makes significantly more sense. Now, I believe that someone did ask, like Derek J. Wyatt, about, oh, are there actually 3 Albedos in regards to this theory that I had come up with? Because I had come up with this theory several years ago at this point, and I'm only just now making a video on it. But his answer was no, that it's all just one Albedo, but I want you to consider that Derek also said that the original Ben 10,000 and Omniverse Ben 10,000 are the same character, that Brainstorm is only a minor electric alien, and that somehow, someway, Hidorium to Eternity is supposed to take place within the main timeline. None of which are true statements. Original Ben 10,000 and Omniverse Ben 10,000 literally cannot be the same version of Ben 10,000. Brainstorm has Storm in his name and used electricity in basically every appearance that he was in up until Omniverse. And there's just no place for Hidorium to Eternity to be in the main timeline of Ben 10 because it has so many inconsistencies. And who in the world is Jonesy? If you've seen my video where I talk about my few criticisms of RWBY, then you're aware that I don't always take crew statements at face value. And I think that's important. I think that if the media in question and the people who make the media have contradicting sentiments, then it is up to the viewer to decide. Do I believe the medium? Do I believe the creator of it? Or do you do like me and you come up with your own thing that fits with what the show has given you to make it just a little bit better and not seem like it's not incompetently written? That's why even though Kruby says that the Volume 4 comics are canon, I don't agree because I read them and realized, hey, these things are inconsistent, it's not canon. And it's why whenever a Ben 10 crew member says something but the show presents it this way, I find a middle ground. Heck, you can go to one of my RWBY theories, the Neo is a spider theory. That one, I outright ignored what the writer of the book said because I don't agree with that sentiment because it doesn't line up with what the book itself gave us. So All just depends on what makes the most sense. And somehow, someway, they managed to make it to where Albedo actually being 3 different versions of Albedo across, well, honestly, it's just across his last couple appearances, so I guess it's not really that important. But also it makes more sense than it just being Albedo. Oh, why did they write it like this? Why did they write it like this? All you had to do was make sense. It's not that difficult to write a story that's consistent, people. Please. This is the first video of 2024. Going in, talking about this stupid 3 Albedo's theory. It sounds like a parody of 3 Amigos. God. Okay. Alright, enough of this. Do all that YouTube algorithm stuff. Like the video, comment, subscribe to the channel. And I'll see you when I see you.
If I bleed tonight, if I am sad